Ever notice how, like, sometimes the quietest person in the room ends up being the one with the most influence, you know?
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
kind of interesting, right? So today we're going to do a deep dive on that whole idea, looking at Law 4 from Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power.
Mm-hmm.
Always say less than necessary, which I got to say seems a little counterintuitive in our world of, like, constant communication.
It does, doesn't it? You'd think more words equals more power, but Green argues that sometimes the strongest message is the one that's not said.
Right. So how does that work? I mean, Greene's basically saying that oversharing can backfire.
Well, think about it this way. You're in a meeting, and there's that one person who just drones on and on. Are you persuaded by them, or are you, like, secretly checking your phone?
Honestly. Yeah, I'm
Ah,
definitely tuning them out.
exactly. And that's part of what Green's getting at. When you talk too much, people tend to tune you out. But when you hold back, you pique their curiosity. You make them work a little harder to figure you out, which, ironically, can make you more persuasive in the long run.
So there's a strategy to it. It's not just about being quiet. It's about using silence deliberately.
Precisely. And it plays into some pretty fascinating psychology. When we encounter silence, especially from someone we perceive as having power or authority, it creates a sort of information gap that we're naturally compelled to fill.
We can't help but try to figure it out, right? Like, what are they thinking? What's their angle?
Exactly. And because we're filling in those blanks ourselves, we often end up revealing more about our own thoughts and assumptions than we intend to.
Which could actually give the silent person a real advantage, because now they're getting insights into how you think, what you value, maybe even where you're vulnerable.
Exactly. They're gathering information without even asking a question. It's subtle, but it can be incredibly powerful.
This is reminding me of what Greene wrote about Coriolanus, that Roman
Oh,
general.
Coriolanus.
He basically sabotages his entire career because he couldn't keep his mouth shut.
It's a classic cautionary tale, isn't it? And
Yeah.
such a clear example of how not to wield the power of words.
Well, like, here's this legendary war hero, right? Greene talks about how he'd stand before the Roman people, and his battle scars spoke volumes about his courage, his sacrifice. He didn't even need to say anything at first. His presence alone was enough.
It was all about that unspoken narrative, the visual impact, the evidence of his bravery. It spoke for itself. People filled in the blanks with admiration. They built him up in their minds.
But then he gets this idea that he wants to run for consul, and suddenly he's everywhere, giving these long, rambling speeches, bragging about his accomplishments.
And that's where it all starts to unravel. Remember how we were talking about the power of silence, of letting people fill in the blanks with their own positive assumptions?
Yeah.
Well, Coriolanus basically destroyed all of that with his own words. He went from this stoic, almost mythical figure to just another politician full of hot air.
And not just any politician.
Mm.
He actually revealed his true character, which, according to Greene, wasn't all that pretty.
Exactly. Instead of the humble, selfless leader people had imagined, he came across as arrogant, entitled, out of touch. He basically shattered the illusion he had so carefully cultivated.
And it cost him everything.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that sometimes the less we say, the more impactful we are.
It really makes you think, in a world that's so loud, so crowded, maybe holding back is the ultimate power move. And Greene actually gives a great example of this with Louis XIV.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he was famous for saying less.
He was, wasn't he? Louis XIV, the Sun King.
Yeah.
Talk about understanding the art of wielding silence.
But why do you think that worked so well for him? Was it just about, like, projecting an image of power? Or was there something more to it?
Oh, it was definitely more than just an image. Think about it. Louis XIV, he understood that the more he talked, the more likely he was to reveal his hand, to make a mistake.
Right.
So instead, he cultivated this air of mystery. He'd let his ministers, his advisors, practically fall over themselves trying to guess what he was thinking, what he wanted.
So they were practically giving him all the information he needed just by trying to fill in the blank.
Exactly. It was like this unspoken game of chess, and Louis XIV was always a few moves ahead. While they were busy talking, he was listening, observing, strategizing.
And you can't forget his, like, signature line, "I shall see."
Oh, I know, right? Such a simple phrase, but so loaded.
Talk about leaving people hanging. I mean, what do you even say to that?
Yep. Right. I shall see. It's not a yes, it's not a no. It's this brilliant mix of ambiguity and authority that just keeps everyone guessing.
And probably a little bit terrified. But it's interesting, though, because this whole less is more thing, it isn't just some, like, ancient tactic for kings and emperors. Greene even brings up Andy Warhol, which I thought was really fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. Warhol was a master of this.
I mean, think about it. The art world is all about expression, right? But here's Warhol, this incredibly influential artist, and he's famously tight-lipped, especially in interviews.
He was, wasn't he? And I think that was part of his genius. By not over-explaining his work, he actually made it more engaging, more open to interpretation.
Because people would project their own meanings onto it, right? They'd come up with these elaborate theories about what his art meant, when maybe Warhol was just, I don't know, I thought it looked cool.
Exactly. And there's a real power in that, isn't there? In letting go of the need to control the narrative, to have all the answers. It creates a space for other people to connect with your work, your ideas on their own terms.
Which, ironically, can make those connections even stronger,
Oh, absolutely. It's like that old saying, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. And I think Warhol understood that maybe better than anyone.
It's such a contrast, though, isn't it? Like, we live in this world where everyone's constantly shouting their opinions, trying to be the loudest voice in the room.
It's true, isn't it? We're practically drowning in information.
Exactly. And yet, here's this law of power, this timeless strategy that's all about holding back, about letting silence speak for itself. It really makes you wonder, what would happen if we all tried saying a little bit less?
Now, that's a thought-provoking question.
It is, isn't it? But on that note, I think it's time to shift gears a little bit, because so far we've been talking about the power of saying less in a very strategic sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Greene also talks about the very real dangers of, like, loose lips. And he illustrates this point with a pretty harrowing story about a guy named Kondraty Ryliev.
Oh, yes. Kondraty Ryliev. Now, there's a cautionary tale if I've ever heard one.
So this guy, Kondraty Ryliev, he was like a poet, a revolutionary, and he got caught up in this whole uprising against Tsar Nicholas I.
Oh, yeah. Not a great time to be on the wrong side of the Tsar.
Understatement of the century. So Ryliev ends up sentenced to death, public hanging, the whole 9 yards.
Yikes. Talk about high stakes.
Right. And Greene actually describes the whole scene. Ryliev standing there on the platform, the noose around his neck, the crowd gathered, waiting for it all to go down.
I bet you could hear a pin drop.
Oh, I'm sure. So anyway, the trapdoor opens,
Mm.
and the rope snaps.
Whoa, no way.
Yeah, Ryliev falls through, crashes to the ground. He's bruised, he's battered, but he's alive.
Wow. That's like a literal lifeline.
It really is.
Yeah.
And back then, a broken rope during an execution, it was seen as a sign from God, a reason for a pardon.
So what'd he do? Did he keep his mouth shut and count his lucky stars?
Yeah. That. See, Ryliev, he was never one to back down from a good opportunity, So instead of playing it safe, he stands up, remember, this is right after he should have died, dusts himself off, and looks straight at the crowd.
Oh boy, here it comes.
And he said something like, you see, they can't even make a rope right in Russia.
Oof. Yeah, that's going to leave a mark.
You think? Word gets back to Tsar Nicholas, who's probably not thrilled about the whole botched execution thing to begin with.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be the rope maker at that point.
According to Greene, the Tsar was actually this close to pardoning Ryliev.
Really? Wow. Talk about snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
That's Ryliev for you. But it really highlights that whole idea, right, about thinking before you speak, about the weight of our words, especially in those, like, high-pressure situations.
Absolutely. Because let's be real, most of us aren't going to be facing down a czar anytime soon. But we'll have those moments,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like that heated argument with your boss, or maybe you're about to fire off a strongly worded email.
I've been there.
We've all been there. And it's in those moments that it's so easy to let our emotions get the better of us, to say something we'll regret later.
Right, like, is that witty comeback really worth it?
Exactly. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is take a breath, pause, and really think about the message we want to send.
Because, like we've been talking about, silence can speak volumes. And learning how to harness that, how to use it strategically, that's a real skill.
It is, and it's a skill that can serve you well in all areas of life, wouldn't you say?
100%. Whether you're aiming for the corner office or just trying to navigate a tricky conversation with your in-laws, remembering the power of saying less, it can make all the difference.